Welcome back. I am so pleased to introduce you to our panel for the Before I Die New Mexico Symposium. This morning's discussion is getting a green burial in New Mexico. So again, I'm Gail Rubin, the coordinator of the event, and I'm very pleased that we have a panel of people who can give you whatever you need to know about green burial, great aspects about it. Darren Crouch is the CEO of Passages International and founder, yes. Emmett Mayan is the founder of Fathers Building Futures, which you may have seen the casket out in the lobby. Fathers Building Futures makes those caskets, and they're caskets for a good cause. Ooh, maybe that's a new slogan for you guys. Darrell Hill is the CEO and founder of EternityGardens.com, which is a website that helps you find permanent final resting place for the cremated remains of your loved ones. And Linda Canyon is the co-founder of La Puerta Natural Burial Ground, which we'll be doing a field trip to on Sunday morning. And you can talk more about that as part of what you're going to talk about. But I did want to mention all of these drawing slips that you're filling in when you attend a festival event is for 2 burial plots at La Puerta. So if you haven't filled in a drawing slip and gotten your goodie bag, please make sure you do that at some point today. So why don't we start out by having each of you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your businesses and what you bring to the green burial discussion. Darren.
Can I stand up?
Sure,
I can't
sure.
see people over here. My name is Darren Crouch with Passage. Can't hear me? Gail, why are you so short? Or why am I so tall? My name is Darren Crouch. I'm the CEO and founder of Passages International. And we started our company almost 20 years ago in the back of a funeral home in Taos, New Mexico. This was, I think, possibly the Prius at the inception of Whole Foods Market, and we started offering biodegradable urns and eco-friendly caskets for families that wanted something less traditional and more eco-friendly. And we supply our products all over the world through funeral homes. So the alternatives to traditional burial or traditional cremation products would include products made of handmade paper, cornstarch, bamboo, rock salt. We have a 70-page catalog full of products that are very alternative and very unique that allow you to create a memorable experience to say farewell to a loved one. We also do 5 different kinds of woven casket that are certified fair trade. We have 3 willows and 2 bamboos, and they can be used for cremation or traditional burial. I look forward to answering any questions you may have later. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Emmett Mayan, and I founded a project called Fathers Building Futures right here in Albuquerque. And Gail's right, the casket that you see is made by our gentlemen. All of the men that I work with come out of prison. They all have children. They all, when they came out, were clean and sober and hungry to get back to work. And so the challenge that I found as a social worker is when you're working with somebody who's been to prison, it's nearly impossible to find a place to live and to find a job because every application you fill out asks you if you've been to prison. So it's really hard to get that second chance. So when I saw their talent and their drive and the way that they parented their children, to be honest, it motivated me to do everything that I could to start a business with them. And so we are a nonprofit. We actually have a few different businesses, and at this point, we focus on our wood shop, where we make lots of different arts and crafts kind of things and small furniture, but we make beautiful urns and caskets, including plain pine natural burial caskets. green caskets. The first casket that we started with when we started the project was, since I'm Jewish and grew up in the Jewish community and was involved in what the Jewish community calls the Chevra Kadisha, the secret burial society, I was familiar with a kosher casket. And so that was our first project, because those are the hardest to make, because for a kosher casket, there's no metals. So everything has to be held together, just with wood. And so we started with the most challenging. And we brought in rabbis to talk with us about death and dying and preparing. And I look forward to answering questions after. I think the only piece that I would add is, throughout this process, and now we make kosher caskets, regular pine caskets, caskets of all sizes for, all different ages of little children as well, which pains me. But I've never been around a group of people who've been involved with death and dying and funerals, especially so young as they, throughout their life. So it's a really meaningful project, and I look forward to answering your questions as the next part.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Darrell Hill. Is that better? My name is Darrell Hill. I'm the founder and CEO of EternityGardens.com. And on a Saturday like this, probably about 3 years ago, I was having coffee with my parents. And my mother shared with me that she and my father sort of decided that they were putting their final affairs in order. They had chosen to be cremated. And when I asked the question, well, Ma, what would you like for my brother, sister, and I to do with your remains? And my mother said, we'll just scatter our ashes somewhere pretty. And when I did what most people do, I went online. I went online to sort of try and figure out what to do, hopefully later rather than sooner, with the remains of my parents. And I could not find an easy way to do that, an easy way to sort of look online to sort of find out what the options were. And so out of that task, trying to solve what I thought was a fairly simple but significant problem for my parents, I decided to found EternityGardens.com. And what we do on EternityGardens.com is we connect families that have cremated remains, or individuals who choose to be cremated, with cemeteries. Our clients are primarily cemeteries, also natural burial parks, but also scattering services, but anywhere where cremated remains may be laid to rest. And what we try and do, much like the gentleman from Ohio did earlier, was really to inform consumers about the many, many options that are available when it comes to the idea of laying cremated remains to rest, including the idea, the very strong perspective that we have, that there ought to be a level of memorialization, so that family members and future generations at some point in time can still come back and find a dignified record of a life that has been well lived and a life well remembered. So thank you so much, Gail, for having me here, and I look forward to answering your questions as well.
Good morning. My name is Linda Canyon, and my husband, Donald Key, who's in the front row right there, and I started La Puerta Natural Burial Ground. It's been in operation about 2 years now, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Gail, for this opportunity, and thanks to all of you, because we support what you do in our cemetery, and appreciate your support of what we do. So my husband and I have been in healthcare for many decades, and worked in hospice and as well, and realized that at the end of life, people were struggling to bury their loved one respectfully without resources to do so. And the high costs of the traditional funeral were very prohibitive to a lot of people. So because neither one of us wanted to be cremated or embalmed, this kind of evolved, and we searched high and low and found some land 15 miles south of Berlin that is right up next to the Monzano Mountains. We've got 40 acres there of natural burial ground. It's beautiful in our mind. I think it's peaceful out there. The railroad passes on one side, and We have a dedicated Jewish section, and we have a dedicated Catholic section, and we have a family section, and then for everybody else. So there's room for everybody out there. And Passages International has the beautiful caskets that we love to use. Father's Building Futures has beautiful pine caskets. We also will bury cremated remains. So we appreciate Darrell helping people find a place for their loved ones' cremains. And
pets.
And pets. We thank you, Darrell. We also have a pet cemetery section, so people are burying pets there as well. And any questions, we will all answer.
And I did want to mention that as part of the festival, well, Passages International and EternityGardens.com are sponsors, and that Father's Building Futures is receiving a portion of the sponsorship dollars that have been contributed to support this festival. So we're supporting that nonprofit social enterprise along with everything else we're doing with this festival. And I want to thank you all for your participation in that regard. I bet you're all dying to ask questions. So just remember, when people say green burial, here in New Mexico, green burial is really brown burial. We live in a high desert climate, and green things don't grow that easily out here in the desert, but it is beautiful. And I am originally from the East Coast, and I found when I go back there that I kind of feel overwhelmed by all the trees and the greenery. But those who love New Mexico, I think, would love to find a permanent burial spot at La Puerta, or really, any of the cemeteries we have here. Let me ask, let's start out with, we've been talking about memorialization in the previous session. What are you allowed to do with your burial plot in La Puerta in terms of putting a marker out there?
So the marker stones at La Puerta have to be made of, they have to be natural stone and not polished or granite, but they can be engraved. And we have also people that plant like a yucca, something that will grow. Lots of things. A rose bush, for instance, would not make it out there. But yucca or desert willow, things natural to that area will grow. So some people mark with that. And yeah, you can have it engraved if you'd like to or not. You can choose a unique stone that lies flat and not mark it at all. It's really up to the person. Oh, and it has to lie flat. Donald just went like that. It has to lie flat on the ground. It can't be a monument, something that sticks up very high. Yes?
What are those green stones I saw piled up by the shed?
Oh, that's it's slate. And if somebody wants to, the local rancher provided those, and so if somebody wants one of those, it's like $20 to $30, depending on the size. The size requirements also, it has to be no larger than 20 inches by 20 inches. Yes.
Where is the cemetery in Old Sprouts?
My husband and I, Donald Key, it's own.
Where is the cemetery located?
Yeah, and who owns it? Yeah. Okay. So my husband and I own the cemetery, and it's a 40-acre natural burial cemetery. It's registered by the state and the county as a cemetery in perpetuity, and it's 15 miles south of Berlin on Highway 47. So up next to. Thank you. 3.5 miles north of 60, up against the Manzano Mountains.
Well, what's the advantage? Are lots are cheaper, or what?
Yes. So for you, Yes, that's the advantage. And there's nothing else out there. It's really difficult to find cemetery land. Like now, even in Albuquerque, it would be very difficult to find land that would be zoned as and okay to put a cemetery in.
If a person were to buy a plot and then they decided they wanted to go somewhere else, could they sell it?
Yes, you can pass it on to somebody else. Yes. Or you can sell it to somebody else if you want to, yes.
For the price you paid or whatever the market is?
We wouldn't want you to mark it up higher than the price you paid for it, but and nobody would do that anyway. They could just buy another one.
Are there any other official green burials in New Mexico?
We have the only totally green burial cemetery in New Mexico.
And it's the only Green Burial Council certified burial
That's
ground
true.
in New
We're
Mexico.
certified by the National Green Burial Council, and it's the only one in New Mexico certified by the National Green Burial Council.
Grass out there? No, I don't imagine there is.
Well, there's natural grass. Yeah, it's not.
No
It does
lawns.
not look like. It does not look like one of the perpetual care cemeteries, like Sunset Memorial Park. That would never happen out there. We don't have the water or anything. It's very natural. That's why we call it Natural Burial New Mexico.
Although I would like to point out there are like old Spanish land grant cemeteries where you could get a natural burial, but they don't seem to be making a point of marketing themselves for natural burial grounds.
Right,
Do you have a
and
point
if
for
you
that, Darren?
if you live out in a rural area and you have 5 acres and you're at least 150 feet from a water source, you can be buried on your own property. We've found that people that have that property still would prefer being buried at our cemetery because they feel like their family will most likely sell their land, and they don't want to be there if the family sells the land. But New Mexico is very, we're very lucky that we have wonderful funeral homes that will help people do a natural burial. And we also have the opportunity to, if you're a very independent person, to do a home funeral, it's called, or a family-directed burial, and not use a funeral home at all. So there's a wide range that we have in New Mexico, and actually 40 states in the United States, you can bury naturally without the use of a funeral home at all, and in 10 states, they require the use of a funeral home. So that's that, and I
think one of the things to talk about briefly is what is a green or natural funeral. I think there's a little confusion out there, and traditionally in this country, at least since the Civil War, death has been about preservation. We take a dead body and we preserve it. And that preservation can be for decades or hundreds of years. Not only do we take the dead body and pump it full of formaldehyde-based fluids to preserve the body itself, we then put that body in a metal box, like a giant refrigerator that's sealed and locked. We then take that box and put it in another box in the ground that's made of concrete or plastic or bronze in some cases. We then take a piece of granite and we put it above it to mark that. And that's the way it's been done historically for, some form of that for the last 150 years. This is about completely changing that and offering consumers something very different. This is about allowing your body to go back to the earth. Like every other living thing that walks on this planet, when it dies, it goes back to the earth. It doesn't get preserved. A leaf falls from a tree, an animal dies, it regenerates the planet. And we as a species have become pretty arrogant in terms of when we die, we consume for 60, 70, 80 years. We take from the planet in whatever form that is, whether it's air we breathe, water we drink, food we eat. And when we die, you're like, no. can't have this. You know, sounds like a pop song, but you can't have this. And it's sort of, it's crazy to me that, you know, we've come to this point, given the state of the planet at the moment, where I heard statistics recently where there could be more plastic in the ocean by 2050 than fish. Oh. You know, we are at a tipping point here where in every aspect of our lives, we need to be looking to do something more eco-friendly and more sustainable, whether it's the vehicles we drive, the food we eat, the airplanes we ride on, whatever it is, there's more eco-friendly and more sustainable options. And what we're talking about here is Death Care's attempt to make it more sustainable and more eco-friendly. But there's another aspect to it. There's the meaningful part of it where families are able to take back the death process. The other part of what happened in funeral care, at least in this country, it became very clinical. Somebody dies, funeral director comes, they whisk the body away, the body is stored for a day or two, the body is prepared, then you have a service or a viewing, and before you know it, the body is buried or cremated. And there's nothing, I don't want to demonize the funeral industry because they're doing valuable work and there's not many people that want to deal with a dead body, nor are there people, you know, it's also a very difficult job to deal with a family at their most sensitive time in their lives. But I think I lost my train of thought there. I think that, you know, it's about taking the funeral process back and being more involved in it, because the way it's been done for the last several decades, because most of it's done for you, it's hard for you to actually register that this person's actually gone. You know, when you preserve it, when you prepare a body or spend time with a body, and you're involved in maybe creating a casket or assembling a casket or digging a grave or filling a grave, there's some closure there. You know that person's gone. And by doing some of those things, it allows you to heal. And so, you know, the natural burial or green funeral movement is more than one thing. You know, it allows people to do many things that are meaningful to them, and hopefully, you know, memorialize and remember someone in a meaningful way, and give them a meaningful send-off.
And in fact, I'd like to mention that Jewish burial is naturally green burial, which gives us an opportunity to talk with Emmett about the Jewish traditions for funerals and burials and how that ties in with green burial. Would you comment on that?
I'm wearing two hats.
Yes.
So, the Jewish community, it's green burial, and what's interesting is the tradition of burying in the way that the Jewish community has been done for so long that now there's sort of an intersection with, oh wow, the green burial community is part of our community. And I think what's happened in New Mexico with a partnership with La Puerta, Natural Burial Ground, has been really great, and that's why there's a Jewish cemetery, a Jewish section at La Puerta. So the Jewish community believes that, you know, a burial has to happen within 24 hours. The casket is to be plain. Everybody's buried the same way. It's a pine casket. There's no metal. You could be rich or poor. We're going to be buried the same way. It's a white shroud. You are prepared within that 24 hours. You are washed, which is called the tahara. It's a spiritual washing where members of your own community, a trained volunteer group, that was the Chevra Kadisha, the secret burial society that I referenced. It's our job to get the body ready, and so a spiritual washing and prayers, and it's all done in silence with some chanting at the end. It's quite a beautiful little ceremony, not for the family, but for the community to take care of. And then afterwards, they're put in their white shroud and they're put in the pine casket. and then the family will have that casket returned to them and be prepared for burial. And all of that has to happen traditionally within 24 hours. That's a lot of activity to make sure it happens. And when we looked around the community, each of the synagogues in Albuquerque, or two of the synagogues, has a cemetery. Congregation Albert has a partnership with French in their cemetery, and B'nai Israel has a section at a cemetery. And the other smaller communities, Nahalat Shalom, where I'm the president, we did not. And when someone would die, we would sort of be on our own. But I felt like within the religious community, whatever faith you're part of, one of the things that you should have when you're part of a faith community is a place to be buried. And so it was such a healthy healing process to sit with Linda and Donald and say, this is our needs from the Jewish community, this is what it looks like. And it seems to us, because we were sort of discovering the conversation as we went along, it didn't hit us that our tradition, that has been our tradition for 2,000 years, was also this green burial tradition. And it was like, well, what about this? They're like, yeah, we can accommodate that. And what about this? And oh yeah, we can accommodate that. And so it all went through. And so when we decided to dedicate, we went down there and you showed us a section and you said, okay, so how many plots can you anticipate in the Jewish community? I think we picked 900 or something. And we picked out a section, and then our community came down with with instruments. And if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, I think that's what it reminded me of. It was like we brought down our little fiddles and our kippot, and we danced around and said chants as we fiddled our Fiddler on the Roof kind of way around the perimeter of this section, and we made it ours. And so that really helped it to make it real for us. So now within our synagogue, when someone passes away, we have an immediate connect. We know exactly, where they can go to. And if they want a kosher casket, that's great. If they don't want a kosher casket, they want a pine casket, they want something else, that's fine. And we know just where they're going. So I really appreciate that. So
I'd like to add something about the 24-hour rule. So this comes because it's both biblically mandated. In Deuteronomy, it says, his body shall not remain out overnight. He shall be buried the same day. But also practically speaking, when you think of a hot desert culture and there's no refrigeration, decomposition sets in within 24 hours. So you do want to have a speedy disposition of that body. You have a question?
No, a friend of my sister's has, one of the parents was dead, and the spouse died, and they had to comply with that. They had to put the body in
Refrigerator.
It had to be frozen.
Refrigerated.
To where the spouse was. And also, aren't there holes drilled in the bottom?
Yes, in fact, we have it, yes, to speed the decomposition, the ashes to ashes, dust to dust process, yeah.
I don't know whether that's the kosher or whether that's the norm for just any Jewish burial.
Most kosher caskets do have holes in the bottom to help speed that up. And, well, to transition to the topic of cremation and greenness, cremation is officially frowned upon in the Jewish tradition by the Orthodox, but the Reform movement and your less observant Jews are certainly open to cremation, and the cremation rate has exceeded 50% nationwide. And Darrell, can you talk about that a bit? Can cremation be green?
So, yes, absolutely. And I think the way that most people sort of think about cremation and environmental sustainability, it's really along a spectrum. The idea that if you sort of start, the points that Darren was making about the processing of the body, and you sort of remove that, if you choose to be cremated, then that becomes more environmentally sustainable. There is, the way that you might think traditionally about cremation is through a crematory, which releases a lot of energy in order to consume the body via fire. There are, last count, there are probably about 15 states in the United States that offered something called alkaline hydrolysis, right? Very sort of complicated word, but what it essentially means is there's a different way that a body can be decomposed over time. It's essentially with a solution of 95% water and a chemical reaction. That is arguably far more environmentally sustainable than being heated to 12 or 1400 degrees Fahrenheit where the body is consumed with flame. And so now, again, there are a number of communities in a number of states that are beginning to consider a more environmentally friendly, a more green option for cremation. The process, the end result is still the same. You still have the bone fragments that are in a very fine state that are traditionally returned to the family. What we have also found at EternityGardens.com is really there's sort of an intersection between families that consider and choose cremation and green burial. So one of the things we did when we looked at sort of starting the company is we did a survey just to sort of see what the market response would be. And for people that chose cremation, it wasn't more than 50%, but a number of them chose cremation because of cost. All right, because it simply is less expensive. But after that, people chose cremation because of the perceived environmental concerns. And so what we found is that there's a very strong connection between consumers that sort of choose cremation and consumers that also have a strong perspective on being eco-friendly and on being environmentally sensitive. You know, and it's interesting. So the other exercise that we went through when we sort of tried to find out the benefits of cremation, some of you may be aware there is a University of Washington has a College of the Environment. And I had a contact who was on the faculty there, and I sort of reached out to her to say, you know, this is sort of what I'm thinking about, and this is my thought, is that to the point that Darren made, is that, you know, if you take cremated remains, just cremated remains, right, and sort of return them to the soil, you know, is there an environmentally sustainable benefit that happens? And the response I got back from the soil professor was, absolutely. I mean, it's essentially sort of calcium, right? So it's calcium, you know, bones are calcium. It gets sort of returned to the soil. The process of sort of breaking down that calcium in the soil, it releases nitrogen into the earth, and nitrogen-rich soil is very good for plant life. But what's interesting is he also sort of went further and said, but we shouldn't stop there. We should return all of our organic material back to the soil, and that is, in fact, so that's the green burial argument, the complete green burial argument. He said, you know, that is a far more environmentally sustainable path on which to go. And so the idea that cremation in its current form, heat-based, is somewhat frowned upon. When you look at it on a sliding scale, some would argue that it's better than, or it's not better, but the impact on the environment is more sustainable than what we in America have begun to call traditional burial. It is not as environmentally sustainable as something called alkaline hydrolysis, which doesn't release as much energy into the environment. But really, when you think about it, just from a space perspective, that essentially the space that buried and cremated remains sort of takes up, you know, it's a much more efficient use of the land. And so, on a number of different areas, you know, choosing to be cremated in one form or another offers a somewhat more environmentally sustainable impact than more traditional ways of sort of what the industry calls sort of final disposition.
And actually, Colorado does allow alkaline hydrolysis, and I understand there's a funeral home in, I think, the Colorado Springs area that is getting a alkaline hydrolysis machine. Question?
I'm familiar with a group in Crestone that does...
Crestone open-air funeral pyres.
Yes.
You have to establish residency in Crestone to take advantage of that. I think you have to live there at least 6 months. You can't just decide, I'm going to die and have my body shipped to Crestone for an open-air funeral pyre. But
So what I love about these festivals is earlier this week I was at a Before I Die festival in Louisville. That was the first time I'd actually sort of heard of the Crestone, Colorado open funeral pyre. And so clearly that news has made it down to New Mexico, and so I'm glad to hear you mention it. Yes,
What is
ma'am.
it that you're talking about? Open air what?
So I'm actually unfamiliar with it. If you would like to share more, or
No,
Gail,
I
if you-
know.
okay.
I know about it. So up in Crestone, it's this little town on the western slope of Colorado. They have had this project. It's a nonprofit where if you want to have your body burned on a funeral pyre, actually wood-fired, open to the sky, they have this set up there where you can be cremated on a funeral pyre. It's, I think, the only place in the United States you can get that. What, you're shaking your head? There are other places?
Yes, also in Colorado at the Shambhala Mountain Center, it's possible.
Shambhala Mountain Center. Oh, I thought that was just for the members of that community, though.
Yes.
Okay.
In Crestone, you have to own property. It's not a question of having to.
Okay, you have to own property in Crestone to take advantage of that, so.
Oh, the Crestone End of Life.
The Crestone End of Life Project, yes. Yes.
May I say one thing about cremation as well? Is one thing that people kind of forget about is that when people are cremated, the container that they're cremated in is often has toxic material in it, so that the toxicity does enter the air from the containers. And that's one of the great things about what Passages has, is if people choose cremation and they are cremated in one of the Passages biodegradable containers, there is not so much toxicity. And when a body comes from, for instance, the office of the medical investigator, they are in a body bag that is made of basically PVC material that has chloroform and other very toxic things in it. And that gets cremated, the person gets cremated then in that body bag. So the container that a person is in for cremation, often there is a huge environmental impact on that as well. So that's something else to consider. And I know that in the Catholic community, sometimes a person is embalmed and placed in one of those very expensive hardwood caskets, and then the family decides to cremate after the full funeral mass. And then that casket and the person and the embalming fluid is all cremated. So that is, again, about cremation, something that people have to really know what they are doing when they do that. And to lessen the environmental impact, a person could be put after cremation in a biodegradable container too, so that container will biodegrade and the ashes will eventually go back if a person chooses. The Catholic community is not supposed to scatter ashes. They're all supposed to remain together. So they often bury the urns, and if an urn is biodegradable, that helps at least.
And I'll just to piggyback off of Linda's comments, what I have found with EternityGardens.com is that there are actually more Catholic cemeteries that are beginning to open up natural burial spaces. And so that was something I came across probably in the last 6 or 9 months. So I don't know what the options are here in New Mexico, but I know certainly in the state of Ohio, Catholic cemeteries are offering that cemetery essentially becomes a hybrid cemetery where they have sort of more traditional offerings, casketed burial, or you can take cremated remains in an urn and sort of put them in a columbarium or in a niche. But cemeteries are also sort of setting aside space where they can, where natural burial can be performed. I don't know if you, there's one, I believe it's in Dayton. That's right. That's right, yeah. So again, I think the industry, the profession as a whole, is beginning to respond to the needs of consumers, some of whom want what is considered sort of a traditional funeral, but as more consumers think about the environmental impact, the profession and the marketplace, when you have people that are founding new burial parks, has really begun to respond to market demand.
Let's talk a bit about water disposition. Darren, you've got some of your water-soluble urns that provide a different way for families to approach that.
Yeah, we have. We did some studies on what people do with cremated remains, and there's a large number, probably 70% of people who cremate intend to ultimately scatter the remains, and many of those will be done in the water. Whether you live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Kansas City, Missouri, people have served in the Navy, people have beach houses or lake houses or vacation spots, and there's a romance with scattering at sea or on water. And so we have a large number of products that are designed to enable you to do that. We had a family that purchased 100 of our urns, and they went on a whale watching cruise with 100 of their friends. And each guest hand wrote on the urn, and we have photographs of these 100 urns airborne going off the side of a vessel off the coast of Maui to scatter the remains. And what we see our products as is a means to an end. They enable you to have a celebration of someone's life, whatever that is, whether it's, going to Hawaii and scattering remains off the coast of Hawaii, or if it's going up to Sandia Peak and scattering remains there, or if it's burying at La Puerta Natural Burial Grounds. It's all about providing solutions that enable consumers to do what they want. And, I think just to change the subject slightly, with the creation of the internet, that gave people a lot more access to information. And I think the reason that Gail does this this festival is to encourage people to plan. And 15, 20 years ago, the only way you could get that information was if you walked in the doors of a funeral home and asked the funeral director what's available. Unfortunately, back then, there really wasn't very much available, and so you were generally led down the path of least resistance, which is the way a funeral was conducted for the last 150 years. Today, you can learn much more about your options at events like this and online, so you can actually plan a funeral that's more meaningful to you and your loved one that's passed away. And so, I really encourage Gail, and I thank you, Gail, for doing this, but I also say that, spend some time researching it and finding out what's meaningful to you so that you can communicate those things to family and friends, so that when the inevitable occurs, they know what you want.
All right, questions.
Do you have, sorry I didn't bring it with me. About a year and a half ago, I just happened to turn on the tube, and here's a beautiful documentary about an Asian professor at the University of Michigan, go blue, who was dying of cancer, and he researched this whole thing, and they followed the entire process through to the green burial, and that's when I found you, and I
think
looked
it's
online. Do you know, I don't know if that was Frontline or
I don't know, but they created a movie, and I think it's called A Will for the Woods.
That's what it is.
And
A
it
Will
was,
for the Woods.
Yeah, so he was, I think, from Michigan, but he ultimately got buried in South Carolina somewhere, or North Carolina.
Yeah.
He had to work to find a place,
Right.
but it was so beautiful, where they showed the entire process and how the family prepared his friends, prepared his body. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff for sure. And people, I think, Linda, you can probably speak to this. When I talk to people that operate green cemeteries, they speak about how meaningful and how powerful this movement is. A Will for the Woods. And I think his name might have been Will, but I'm not sure. But he was definitely an Asian professor, yeah.
Mary.
Question specifically about the ashes in the water. Do we know what happens to the ashes? Does it contribute to further pollution? Has anyone studied, do they biodegrade in the ocean?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would assume that since they're all organic in nature, they would over time.
Yeah. So the way I would think about it is fish have skeletal structures as well, and so all of their organic material decomposes and or is consumed over time. Bone fragments that are scattered into the open sea, I would imagine, go the way of bones of whales, sharks, any other life creatures that all die and essentially decompose and are processed in the water.
Yeah, as long as they're not full of chemicals from.
Well, they're sterile.
Right, yeah, cremated remains are inert. There's no value.
Right, the cremation process, whether it's alkaline hydrolysis or by fire, results in a sterile calcium carbonate, basically. Calcium phosphate, yeah. And so, it's just more calcium floating around in the world. But, yes.
Cremated in the casket, or like she was saying, after the person decides to get cremated in the casket?
What if they're cremated in the casket? Well, the casket is burned away. Yeah. In fact, we just did a tour at French's crematory yesterday, and they actually opened the retort to show us the skeletal remains and the screws and the hinges from the casket that was cremated with the body. So they sweep that out of the cremated remains, any metal parts, and just return the bones as they are ground up into about a consistency of sand.
The environmental concerns of that are when it goes up in the air at the time of burning. So it goes into the air that we breathe is more, but not the after product.
Yes.
What is the other way to be cremated you talked about? Was the chemical?
Alkaline hydrolysis.
Do they use chemicals so that is toxic then?
It's not toxic, actually. It's
potassium chloride, which is actually lye.
With water, lots of water.
With water.
Yeah.
So, and again, to me, even it's called aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis, and that using the water to do that, water is also a precious resource, and it takes quite a few gallons of water each time that you do that. Plus, the water is heated to about 200 degrees. So that process, and it takes, from what I have researched, it takes from 6 to 12 hours of heating that water that long in order to do that process. There are 12 states in the United States that have passed a law allowing alkaline hydrolysis, and there are 6 states now that actually have it. Minnesota is one, Colorado is another. Illinois is another.
Florida and Maine too.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Florida and Maine also have.
Florida and Maine, so
Yeah.
we probably almost listed all 6 of them.
So what's more expensive than your traditional cremation?
It costs around $3,000, the
Well,
average.
it can depend on the funeral home,
and
whatever.
it depends on the funeral
Yeah.
home, of course. But it, again, it's not available in New Mexico. It's not one of the states that allows it. The Catholic Church, the research I've done, the Catholic Church does not allow that. They think it's disrespectful. The Catholic Church has allowed cremation since the late 60s, early 70s. Prior to that, they did not. They do not allow aquamation. They feel it's not respectful to the body because it gets, most of the water goes down the drain, and then it's just the fragments that are remaining. So.
Yes.
No, I think some of the questions are related to trying to compare traditional cremation to this new process. Maybe someone could compare, what gets released in the traditional cremation versus the new process and the costs.
The aquamation alkaline hydrolysis process keeps all of your silver fillings in your teeth intact. Whereas when you're cremated by fire, that mercury in your silver fillings evaporates out into the atmosphere. And most systems are not able to scrub that out. In our crematory tour yesterday, we were told that basically the only thing that is emitted is heat, but we didn't get into talking about the mercury in your silver fillings. But also, the alkaline hydrolysis process uses about 1/10 of the energy used in fire-based cremation. So even though you are heating water for a long period of time, it's still less energy than fire-based cremation.
But you're using a lot of water.
But you're using, yes, a full tank of water to submerge the body, and it basically speeds up the process of decomposition. And then you have this coffee-colored sterile liquid, which is pH balanced before it's put down the drain. And actually, I heard a story from Maine that the funeral home in Maine that is using that system cleaned up the sewer system in their town because most effluent is more acid-based. So it helped the environment and the sewer pipes. So
I appreciate your question, and I think events like these really invite consumers and families to have this discussion. The fact of the matter is that there are so many different choices for families to choose from. And with Gail doing this now for the second time and sort of providing that information to families, really sort of encouraging families to sort of think, what is our family tradition? What final form do we want our remains to be in? But then beyond that, and this is something that we'll talk about throughout the rest of the day, is to actually sort of go forward and make those plans. So asking those questions now, trying to figure out what's important and what's really valuable, trying to figure out the question of affordability as well, but then sort of saying, once you've done your research, to really sort of put in writing what you want, have the conversations with your families, think about cost and things like that. And so, there are so many different options, but to have the conversation now and sort of think about what you want, I think is really key.
yes.
So if you get buried, you don't do the cremation, but you get buried, but you get, it's all organic and biodegradable. Can the plot be used again after a given amount of time for the body to completely decompose? Now you're not taking up, three.
Can a grave be reused? A plot, yeah.
Taking up any more land?
Well, we don't do that at La Puerta because we've only been starting to bury for 2 years now, and we have 40 acres. So we could have all of Albuquerque out there, and we wouldn't have to reuse a plot. But I know that around the world, for instance, in Germany, you basically rent a plot. In the European countries, you are buried naturally. They don't. Lots of around the world, most. And because Darren's company is international, he knows that they don't do what we do here in the United States. Most people are buried naturally around the world. But in the European countries that are so small, you basically rent that plot for about 25 years, and then they dig up whatever's left, and then another person is buried there. So that's what they do in some countries.
If you have a tombstone, do they put 2 tombstones? Just start stacking them, or I mean, because that's the thing. Is you're only taking up that place where your tombstone is.
Right, that's true. I'm sure that the family also gets the tombstone if they want it, and another person is buried there. Yeah.
I saw another, yes.
You mentioned that you could do a home burial, not at your home, but without a funeral home. Let's say that you're not Jewish and you don't have the support for doing that. How would you accomplish it?
You want to?
There are, I'm not sure about here in Albuquerque, but around the country there are like death doulas. Doulas, the just like bringing a life into the world. There are people that will help you send somebody out of this world, and they can provide the support, help with preservation of the body while family and friends come into town, help with the burial, preparation, all that type of stuff. So there are those people out there.
And the Home Funeral Alliance exists online with great information and resources for people who want to hold a home funeral. And there was some, we did have a death doula panel in Santa Fe. There are a number of them up in Santa Fe.
You don't have to have a death doula either. A family, it can be all family or friends that take care of the body for the family. So if someone passes away, if you want to get on our website, we have various scenarios. It's a downloadable document at the bottom of the About page. The website is naturalburialnewmexico.com. And you can do the entire thing without that. I'm actually giving a talk at Oasis if you want to come on a Monday morning at 10:30, I believe it is, on home funerals for independent folks, if anybody wants to know in detail how to do a home funeral without using the funeral industry at all. But again, you can use the funeral industry for part of it. You can have them, the funeral home, bring a body down to La Puerta, for instance, in a biodegradable casket, or you don't have to use a funeral home. It really is wonderful that in New Mexico we have that choice of either the family doing all of it themselves, or using the funeral home for part of it, or using a funeral home for everything.
Can you just mention the paperwork part of it?
The death certificate becomes probably the most difficult issue to do a home funeral on your own. The funeral industry does not, if someone goes to a funeral home, the funeral home does not have to complete the death certificate prior to final disposition. So final to the person, before the person is buried. If a family is doing the burial themselves, the death certificate has to be completed and filed prior to final disposition. So that makes it more difficult. However, if, for instance, you choose La Puerta, we have 3 funeral homes who have agreed to do the death certificate for families for from $200 to $295, so that they can then do a natural burial quickly if they would prefer. Otherwise, it would involve driving to Santa Fe, getting a hard copy of the death certificate, driving back to Albuquerque or wherever, finding the doctor for the doctor's signature, completing the death certificate, and driving it back to Santa Fe. So having a funeral home agree to do that is very helpful.
And what about the burial transit permit? Do you have to have that?
That's part of the death certificate.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You don't want to be pulled over by the police with a body in your car without that piece of paper. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that at your place that's going to be in perpetuity, what will happen when you guys retire?
That's so polite of you to say that. Instead of, most people say, what happens when you die? What happens if you die first? So we've talked about that a lot, and everybody asks that question. So I'm glad you brought it up. So we have 3 children who are young professionals, and they are also very invested in what we are doing. They are around the country right now. One's in Denver, and one's in Las Cruces, and one is in Washington, D.C. But when we get to the point where we can no longer manage it ourselves, or if we get hit by a bus tomorrow and we're both gone, they would scramble to find someone to manage it, and we would continue. Our plan is to continue it for generations.
Other questions? Yes.
It is registered with the county and the state as a cemetery in perpetuity, so it will always and forever be a cemetery. So even if it were turned over to the county, it would still be a cemetery.
Okay. Yes.
Puerta, are you allowed to put a body directly into the ground, or does it have to be in a coffin?
You can put the body directly into the ground, a burial shroud, or something with handles. We need something with carrying handles, because otherwise it's too difficult to carry and lower. But as long as it's a shroud with handles, that You don't have to be in a blanket. I'm sorry?
Even here locally? Even here locally?
Well, yeah,
there aren't natural
the
burial.
natural burial that we have is the only natural burial ground here. So you would have to talk with each individual cemetery if you wanted to be in Albuquerque as to what they would allow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they allow you to be buried without.
Well, no, and most won't. I think maybe some of the old land-grant Hispanic Catholic cemeteries might allow that, but that requires calling them up and asking them. I'm also, among my many roles, on the cemetery committee for Congregation Albert, and we have a historic section in Fairview where we've been burying people since the late 1800s. And we have about a quarter of an acre that was undeveloped that we are developing to have natural burial plots there in town. But you have to be Jewish, and won't be ready for probably at least another year.
There's questions in the back.
Yes. Does Santa Fe allow natural burial at the National Cemetery? I doubt it. They probably have liners that you have to have. I mean, this is a case of shades of green. You could ask for a Jewish burial because that's no embalming, cotton or linen clothing, the plain pine box, and a number of cemeteries, if they know they're burying somebody Jewish or has requested Jewish burial, they will leave the bottom of the vault out so you're put in contact with the earth. But there would still be something on top to hold the earth up. And I think they might do that in the National Cemetery because they bury Jews all the time. Yes?
I'd like to know how you avoid having an autopsy, because I had an experience in another state where just because somebody died suddenly, of cause unknown, found dead in their house, automatically there's an autopsy, and that took days, and then there was the days of the cost of keeping the body refrigerated, even though there was no intention to do typical embalming. So the cost was horrendous.
So the question is, how do you avoid having an autopsy if somebody dies unattended or suddenly? You can't, unfortunately, I believe is the correct answer.
I'm afraid that it's a legal issue. If someone passes away unexpectedly or accidentally, they are going to have to go to the Office of the Medical Investigator and to determine why they died. In the state of New Mexico, though, the OMI, or Office of Medical Investigator, if you have to have an autopsy and then your body has to be stored, they do not charge for an autopsy, and they do not charge for storing the body in cold storage. So that's something good. But if you were to die, for instance, on hospice, if you were on hospice and passed away, you would not have to go to the Office of Medical Investigator or have an autopsy, because they would know that you were dying and they would know what you were dying from. So you could just stay in your home or go to a funeral home directly, or go to a natural burial ground directly. But you can't avoid, if it's an accidental death, you're going to have to call 911, and you're going to have to go through that process, I'm afraid, because legally they need to know why you died.
But so you're saying if you drop over dead of a heart attack in your home, or you just pass away in your sleep peacefully, you can't avoid that?
I'm afraid not, because they don't know why you died, and they don't.
Well, they may not. If you've got a history of heart conditions, they may just review your medical paperwork and not actually do an autopsy. Happened with.
That's true. They may not. They may
somebody I
not do
know.
an autopsy, but you still have to call 911 if it's an accidental or on a sudden death.
Yeah.
You still have to go through that process. They may send someone out from the office of the medical investigator, and then they may not even take you to the OMI building if they do not suspect foul play or anything, if they think it's a natural death. But you can't, unless you're on hospice, if it's an unexpected death, you can't just say, okay, they died, I'm going to put them in the ground. A doctor has to declare the death and time of death.
If you're 98 years old and you die at home, that's really not an unexpected death.
If you're
Well, that's true. And so,
98
but they would still have to come. A doctor would still have to declare the person dead. So they would still have to send out somebody or take the body somewhere, depending on what.
Yeah.
In that case, is that the OMI, or could you get your your preferred provider or whatever they call it?
Well, your preferred provider, if you passed away at home, would not come to your house and say, okay, this person died. So it would have to be a medical EMS person or somebody from the Office of Medical Investigator would come to your home.
I know when we started our business up in Taos, we literally started in the back of the funeral home. My family is in the funeral business, and I do recall incidences where someone would die at home naturally, and I'm not sure if it was the office of the medical investigator or a local physician that would come and do like an external examination and declare the cause of death if it didn't appear to be suspicious. I don't think you always have to have an autopsy, and if you are 98 years old and you die in your sleep and your doctor can come and say, yeah, they had a heart condition, I don't think they're sending you for an autopsy. I think they can declare that by doing an external examination, which I think in Taos was literally done in the funeral home because there is no morgue, in some of these rural communities, so that's done in the funeral home. The funeral home will pick up the body, remove it, store it until the doctor or OMI can come.
Yeah. You have a comment on that, Donald?
In a lot of counties within the state of New Mexico, there's what referred to, and this is across the country actually, as a coroner. The coroner doesn't necessarily have to be even a medical person. They don't have to be a doctor. So they can come and do an external examination of the body. And if there's nothing that looks suspicious and there is historical information given by the family, or the person is really aged, as you said, then that coroner signs off on that, and that becomes a legal, that person is appointed by the county or the state in that capacity. Here in Albuquerque, we're used to OMI, which is the Office of the Medical Investigator, which, by the way, is owned by the University of New Mexico. So it's a University of New Mexico lab, but the state of New Mexico has an arrangement with them to do exactly what we're talking about here. And so it doesn't mean that every time a person passes away that they're going to run the risk of having an autopsy, because the real issue is to determine the cause of death and to make sure that there hasn't been foul play. And that can be done without an autopsy in many, many cases.
Okay. Well, guess what? Our time is up. So let us give a hand for our wonderful panel